The World with Richard Engel and Yalda Hakim is a brand new podcast from Sky News. With me, Sky News' lead world news presenter Yalda Hakim.
And me, Richard Engel, chief foreign correspondent for NBC News.
Every week, we'll be reporting from the front line of the world's trouble spots and asking the big questions to the world's most important and influential people.
Join us for the ground truth to help you understand what is happening in the world today and why it matters to you.
So that's The World with Richard Engel and Yalda Hakim.
Listen every Wednesday, wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Niall Paterson on today's edition of the Sky News Daily.
I was a bit shocked to learn what I did. It was all rather frightening.
What do we know about her? She had no training. She could have doubled your pills and killed you. It just staggers me that the police aren't interested. Because of that, she thinks she's got away with it.
It's a situation that many of us will face at some point in our life. Your loved one is poorly. They need almost round-the-clock care whilst living at home. Multiple medications need to be given, and they often require help with deeply personal, often vulnerable tasks. So you hire a carer, someone with the pedigree, the CV, the experience to help offer your loved one actual quality of life. But what happens when that person isn't who they say they are?
Did you think that you would get away with it? No one would notice?
Yeah.
And what do you have to say to David's family?
I'm so sorry that has happened to them, which has never happened before.
I'm joined by our People in Politics correspondent, Nick Martin. He's been investigating the story of one family who were faced with a fake carer.
Aye.
And Tim Wilson, board member of the Home Care Association and himself managing director of the Assist Care Group, a regulated home care agency, and the significance of that will become apparent over the course of the podcast. Tim, great to have you with us.
Thank you.
Look, Nick, to you first. As so often happens, your journalism starts not with policy, but with people. On this occasion, David Seal, aged 89, and his daughter, Sarah Whitaker. Tell me about them.
So I first heard from Sarah about a month ago, and she said, Nick, I've got a story. And, you know, we don't ignore calls like that.
No,
so I had a good chat with her. And she says, this is all about my dad, David Seal, who was a businessman, travelled the world for 45 years, but he's 89 now, and life has slowed down for him a bit, and he needs a bit of help at home. So Sarah was looking for a live-in carer. These are people who come in, provide healthcare support for people. Now, on one end of the spectrum, that could be going out and getting some shopping. And on the other, that could be issuing prescription tablets or even in some cases, end-of-life care. So it's a broad spectrum. She needed someone with experience with stroke management who was able to juggle the very many prescription pills that David had. And she fundamentally, Neil, needed to trust this carer. And so she approached an introductory care agency. Now, that's one slice of the sector where you go, you say you need a carer, they introduce you to one, and you kind of then deal with the carer. You pay the carer, and it's very much a relationship between you and the carer.
So this agency, in essence, has a number of people on its books, and what you go to them with your specific requirements?
Yeah, you say, I need a carer. Stroke management experience, catheter experience. He or she needs to be able to drive. They need to have all the relevant checks. And this care agency, Hampshire-based Access Care, said, yes, we'll provide you with some CVs. And ultimately, they looked at the CVs and decided on a carer called Tracy. On paper, she had everything. She was DBS check, that's a criminal references check. She had experience in stroke. She could dish out tablets. She could drive.
Ideal.
It was ideal. So they chose Tracy.
But you said just there, on paper. So I'm suspecting that in reality, it wasn't quite so straightforward.
So Tracy turned up on the train, which was the first red flag because they'd asked for a driver. And Tracy, the carer, said that she couldn't drive that week because of a problem with her licence. They overlooked that. But then the next day, Tracy didn't know how to operate a catheter. David was unable to go to the toilet normally, so he had a catheter. She boiled a pan of Brussels sprouts in 3 inches of oil and seemingly couldn't cook. That was another red flag. And Sarah Whitaker, the daughter in this case, tells me that the carer was dishing out tablets here, there, and everywhere. And this is...
So explain what you mean.
So when someone is on a lot of medication, what you often find is they have a little box with Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and it organises your daily pills. Now, David was taking about 10 quite strong prescription tablets for things like diabetes, blood pressure, but also his heart. And it was important not only to take the tablets at the right time, but clearly in the right quantity. And this required some training. Sarah, the daughter, was concerned that the tablets weren't being issued at the right time.
Wow.
And she describes them as being issued here, there, and everywhere. And crucially, she said, if my father's given a tablet, he'll take it, which is going to become important later on. So here we have a series of red flags very early on that pointed towards this carer not being perhaps as experienced as she was on paper.
Presumably this is the point at which they contact the agency, Access Care. I mean, what did they say at that point about Tracy?
The agency says, we're really surprised by this because Tracy's a really good carer. We've never had any problems with her. She's experienced. And Sarah was saying, well, it's just not looking like that on the ground. And then one day in early September, the family go out for a walk in the sunshine with David in his wheelchair. And the carer is pushing David, and one of the daughters whips out her phone to snap the happy event. And the carer, noticing the phone has been brought up, disappears like a shot out of the frame. And so they go back to the care agency and say, can we have an up-to-date picture of Tracy, the carer? The next minute, that's emailed, and they put the two images side by side, and they realise that they are two different people.
How long had this not Tracy been in David's home?
Nearly 3 weeks.
Wow.
But it's important to remember, Neil, that live-in carers are often caring for relatives who are living on their own. And part of the reason why you get a live-in carer is because you need to be able to pass down some of that responsibility, because families live busy lives and they can't be popping into the house every day. And so something like this can go unlooked, which is also a crucial point of this story.
Yeah.
Access Care call the police, Hampshire Police. They say that Tracy denies the allegation. She says she is who she says she is, and she's gone. Hampshire Police say, well, we've got limited lines of inquiry. We're not going to speak to Tracy, the carer, because she denies it. We do not think it's in the public interest to send a police officer to her house to check this out.
I don't understand. Why wouldn't it be in the public interest to discover if someone is fraudulently claiming to be Tracy, a care worker with a fantastic CV, certainly a CV that David needed?
I've got no idea, Neil.
Right.
So at this point, given that all the signs are that the cops aren't interested, I find Tracy.
Now, which Tracy did you find? Did you find the Tracy who claimed to be Tracy and turned up at David's door for 3 weeks? Or did you find the person whose CV David had first been attracted to?
I wanted to find the real Tracy, whose CV we had on the table. I knew nothing about this woman. For all I know, this was a big misunderstanding. So I turn up to Tracy's house and I explain why I'm there. And she says, I was there. I was in David's house. This is completely false. And we have a bit of a chat. And then I say, look, I've got a photograph.
And that was not me. That was what you think.
So how do I explain that? Do you want to tell me this again? Is it possible you can tell me what happened? Because the image that I have of the lady who was in David Seal's house, just with respect to you, Tracy, it's not you.
I don't know where to explain this.
It's so bad. Very bad, and I'm so sorry because something I've never done in my life. Because when it comes to care, I give it all.
Do you understand why the family are so upset? Because your job was to give David medication and a total stranger was in their house, potentially giving him medication who didn't have the training.
She was trained. I gave her training because I thought it would be...
But you know that's not enough, don't you? You can't just give her training.
Yeah, I know.
And I said, so do you want to tell me the real story? And she goes, this is really bad and I never done anything like this before, but I couldn't do the job, so I asked my friend from church to do the job. And I said, do you understand why David's family are so upset? Because one of the big jobs that you were asked to do was to handle a multitude of very strong prescription tablets that had not only to be given in a particular order, but at a particular time. And the consequences could have been grave. And she said, well, I gave the girl some training.
So what was her rationale for doing this in the first place?
I've got to be honest, Neil, she didn't really explain.
Right.
She said there was a problem with her license. Then she said there was a problem with her car. I was there to get to the bottom of a story. And here, after 20 minutes, I had a full confession and had got to the bottom of the story, or at least a part of the story. We had established that the lady who had been tasked with the job had sent an imposter into David Seal's home.
So why then, at this point, is the regulator not riding to the rescue, the Care Quality Commission?
So Sarah Whitaker and David Seal contacted the Care Quality Commission, they being the care regulator, and were disappointed to find out that the CQC do not regulate introductory care agencies.
You're going to have to explain this to me. Why?
I actually don't know why. The care sector is broken into so many different parts. And Sarah had two choices when she tried to look for a carer. She could have gone for so-called managed care, which is regulated by the Care Quality Commission. Payments are dealt with through the agency, qualifications, checks and all that done by the agency, but that tends to be more expensive. Introductory care, as I said earlier, is about being introduced to a carer, and then that deal is very much done between the client and the carer themselves, and that does tend to be cheaper. It is not regulated by the regulator, and I don't really know why. So it's clear that Access Care acted fairly quickly. They not only called the police, but they also say that they helped the family every step of the way. When we contacted their CEO, Tiggy Bradshaw, she said, we were shocked to hear of this terrible deception and are deeply sorry for what Mr. Seal and his family have experienced. When we heard of these alarming allegations, we contacted Action Fraud and the police and commenced an urgent safeguarding review. We've been in close touch with the family throughout and will continue to collaborate with the police. Now, this next bit's interesting. They say, we have strict protocols in place. However, this extremely unusual circumstances have given us cause for reflection. We are in the process of developing further security checks and procedures for families in receipt of care at home.
Well, let's bring in Tim Wilson of the Home Care Association, and yourself, Tim, working in a regulated home care agency. What's your response to that which you've just heard?
I'm shocked, and I'm deeply sorry for the family that have gone through this, but I'm not surprised. And actually, we deal with cases like this all the time, perhaps monthly. We walked into a similar scenario, and it was apparent that the vulnerable person wasn't coherent. And we didn't leave that property through the fears of what was going on. And to cut a long story short, it turns out he was drugged at the time. That the two PAs involved had overrun his house. And they'd taken almost £140,000 off.
Wow.
Extraordinary.
So these types of things are commonplace. And it's a real concern to me that the regulators aren't covering introductory agencies, because from the general public's point of view, they look and sound and feel like a provider. It feels like you should be able to trust these businesses.
Just pick up the reins there, Tim, and explain why there is this difference between, on the one hand, these agencies that simply provide an introduction to a carer and organisations, like yourself, which do all the checks and then supply both the carer and pay the carer directly.
So it depends on how you pay the worker, depends on whether you need to be regulated or not. So an introductory agency can set up saying their workers are self-employed. And because we're not paying those workers, we don't need to be regulated. So therefore, personal care tasks and activities, serious medications, as you've said, serious taking care of medical and clinical needs occur outside of the regulated envelope just because of payment.
But why, sorry, Nick, but why would care workers choose to place themselves in the unregulated sector where they don't have entitlement to holiday pay, they won't have pension contributions, they won't have the insurance policies that I'm sure companies like yourself have behind you?
It's a really murky world when you start getting under that. Self-employment is self-assessment. And the worker can declare their own income to HMRC. And that, I think, is inherently fraught with danger.
You're suggesting fraud then?
I think that there is certainly an attraction to some carers to work in that way. But it's also around power and control and coercion. The self-employed worker is isolated with the vulnerable person. They don't have supervisors. They don't have managers. They say they have DBS checks. And in what you said earlier, really put an alarm bell in me, because what is a DBS check to a vulnerable person? There is no ability for that vulnerable person to check that DBS.
And even with background checks, and even with a CV which is brimming with qualifications, the problem seems to be, for me, is that at the point that the carer turns up at the front door, there is actually no way of knowing who that person is. There was no check of Tracy when she arrived at the door for David. There was an assumption that this person was legit. And one of the things that Sarah, the daughter of David Seal, is calling for now is some kind of national identity scheme. And we brought it up with the Prime Minister's official spokesperson. And he said, I'm concerned to hear about these reports, and they will go back and have a look and see if there's anything that can be done about it. But this is about regulation. Regulation is designed to reduce the chance of harm to people. And with introductory care agencies, the onus is on finance, not level of care. It's on how they're being paid, not the quality of care that's being offered. That is a fundamental flaw.
From an HMRC perspective, the vulnerable person has to employ the carer.
The World with Richard Engel and Yalda Hakim is a brand new podcast from Sky News. With me, Sky News' lead world news presenter, Yalda Hakim.
And me, Richard Engel, chief foreign correspondent for NBC News.
Every week, we'll be reporting from the front line of the world's trouble spots and asking the big questions to the world's most important and influential people.
Join us for the ground truth to help you understand what is happening in the world today and why it matters to you.
So that's The World with Richard Engel and Yalda Hakim.
Listen every Wednesday, wherever you get your podcasts.
What do we know about introductory care agencies? Because I've been trying to find out a lot about them, how many there are, exactly how popular they are, what their usage is. I mean, we know that the home care, healthcare industry is big. It's said to be worth about £12 billion a year. That's huge. Yeah. But yet I cannot seem to find much about the sort of prevalence of introductory care agencies. Can you tell us a bit more?
I can't because
Which is
it doesn't exist.
Right?
So we've been going to central government saying, look, there's this problem, there's this regulatory gap. And we've been asked the question, well, how many is there? And we can't find out.
I suppose that there has always been an issue with this in terms of unregulated care providers. Now, 20, 30 years ago, it might have been the kindly neighbour who popped round to look after your mum. The difference with the situation right now, though, Tim, is these vulnerable people, these people who are being cared for, are paying for the privilege of people who are unregulated, unguarded, coming into their homes.
We should have a system that offers that protection, whether the individual realises they need it or not, because the virtue of being vulnerable is they are susceptible to abuse.
And what surprised me about this story is that every step of the way, when the families and even the introductory care agency were looking for help, they were told that nothing could be done. So the Care Quality Commission, we're not going to do anything. I think the police's response disappointed all parties because they didn't even seem to want to go and talk to the carer to establish whether anything fraudulent had happened. Now, since we have spoken to Hampshire Police, they have suddenly turned around and said they are investigating. But you would expect that because our intervention might cause them to have a rethink.
We put safeguarding alerts in frequently, perhaps as frequently as weekly.
So this will be where you have been tasked to go around to a property, to a client who has been cared for through the unregulated sector.
Through the unregulated sector, through a PA. And what happens is the package grows to a point where it falls into crisis. And that's typically when the family members get involved. What's going wrong with mum and dad? The PA's meant to be there. Why are we in a crisis? And that's when the regulated sector turns up and finds that actually a lot of these this crisis was avoidable. And if we'd been able to go back in time and had that PA signposted to equipment services, signposted to social workers, where the correct provisions could have been put in place, then the dependency now wouldn't be so high. So perversely, it comes back at the state at a higher cost.
We've been talking about him all the way through the podcast, so I suppose we should give the final word to David Seal himself.
We've been fooled and misled, and that's entirely wrong. The CQC, I thought, was responsible for regulating the care industry. When we get in touch with them to tell them about this tale, they don't want to know. There's no point in being responsible for the care industry if you only deal with people who are registered with you. It's quite pointless.
I think he was left both angry and shocked, but he's also very clear when it comes to regulation. He says, what is the point in a regulator being there if it doesn't regulate everybody in that sector? Mm-hmm. He said it's quite pointless. Mm. But I think we also need to look at the big picture, Neil. The government want to reform the NHS. Mm-hmm. They want us to be cared for more in our homes, in our communities,
exactly
like David wanted to.
Yeah.
That relies on us trusting the system that's in place.
And I'm suspecting that you don't have very much trust in it as it stands.
Well, you know me, Neil. You know, I act on evidence, you know.
You do indeed. You do indeed. Tim, Nick, great to have you both with us. Thanks for your expertise. A spokesperson for the Care Quality Commission told Sky News, "We appreciate the distress this incident has caused both Mr. Seal and Mrs. Whitaker. However, as neither introductory agencies nor self-employed carers are covered by CQC's remit, we are unable to take action in this case. These matters should be reported in the first instance to the local authority safeguarding team, who have the remit to investigate the issue and take necessary action. Any questions regarding the legal framework for how health and social care is regulated in England is a matter for the government." And a Department of Health and Social Care spokesperson told Sky News this: "Our sympathies are with David's family and friends in this deeply concerning case. This government inherited a social care system in crisis. We are committed to building a national care service, underpinned by national standards and delivered locally, to improve the consistency of care and ensure everyone can live an independent and dignified life. A healthy NHS and social care system requires strong regulation to ensure patient and user safety, and that's why we're reforming the Care Quality Commission to make sure it is fit for purpose." You'll have heard Hampshire Police mentioned in our podcast today. We spoke to them. A spokesperson told us they were looking into the case, adding, "Officers are carrying out a number of inquiries and the incident is still under investigation to determine whether any crimes have been committed." And that is your lot for this edition of The Daily. You can watch Nick Martin's full report. Just head to skynews.com. We'll see you again soon.
The World with Richard Engel and Yalda Hakim is a brand new podcast from Sky News. With me, Sky News' lead world news presenter Yalda Hakim.
And me, Richard Engel, chief foreign correspondent for NBC News.
Every week, we'll be reporting from the front line of the world's trouble spots and asking the big questions to the world's most important and influential people.
Join us for the ground truth to help you understand what is happening in the world today and why it matters to you.
So that's The World with Richard Engel and Yalda Hakim.
Listen every Wednesday, wherever you get your podcasts.